That I too am an African-American female. But that in and of itself does not win the case, you understand. There are other African-Americans out there who run for political office who really don't have any plan for the African-American community at all, okay? We may have one in the Senate. So, the question is, do you actually have a plan that the community can get behind? And I'd like to invite you to my website. Obviously, I have several, but there's one that I'd like to talk about right now because it's one I think that affects everybody, particularly the African-American community, but the community writ large. And that is that we have a judicial system that is fundamentally unfair to certain populations in our country. And that is true. You can't debate it. The statistics are in. Our judicial system is harder on poor people. It is harder on people of color. It is harder on people who lack education. It is much harder on people who are not English speaking. These are facts. And the thing is, we protest and we protest and we protest and we don't ever do anything about it. Okay? So here's a proposal that I'd like you to noodle on for just a moment. Every part of our judicial system is manned by people, and people are fallible. They have internal biases, some of which they are aware of, others which they are not. The bottom line is, when a prosecutor exercises his or her discretion, when a judge exercises his or her discretion, we never have a mechanism to hold them accountable if they always do so in a way that hurts a particular population. So what I suggest is this. Let's create this system where every judge, every prosecutor has a little iPad, or something like that, where they put in what they choose to do with each case. And that information is housed at the DOJ. And it's tracked. And so what happens is you begin to build a record on each prosecutor, each judge, what they do. And when there are things that start to emerge as a pattern, you can inform the prosecutor or the judge and say, hey, are you aware that you have a certain kind of pattern in how you act? Because some of them may not be aware. You know, when you're dealing with cases all the time and it's coming, you got to get through them, you may not be aware that you have certain biases. So the first thing we need to do is create a system that makes people aware of their own biases. The second thing we need to do is give them the kind of training and help if they do have that kind of bias. We shouldn't start from the presumption that it's intentional or that they're doing this to be mean or evil or wrong. Give them the training to make them aware that they are harder on certain kinds of populations than others, that they're out of whack with national norms on certain kinds of judgments. Maybe you have a bias against divorcees. Maybe you have a bias against women. Who knows? But we got to be able to track that. We got to inform you of it. And once we've informed you, we've got to give you the opportunity to reform. And if you fail to reform, we have to have the ability to remove you. Because the bottom line is, we have never held people accountable, especially our judges and prosecutors, for demonstrable racial bias in the way they treat the people that they deal with. And it is time that we actually do something about that. Because if we fail to do that, what you say is that this fundamental unequal treatment is okay under our Constitution. And I believe that our Constitution says that we must treat people equally under the law.
Thank you, Ms. Keene. I'm only trying to rush you off because we're running out of time. I know we got at least 4 questions to go, so I know it's difficult for politics. I'm coming right to you, Congressman, yeah. So in the interest of time, though, I know it's tough for politicians to have brevity sometimes, but please try your best. Go ahead, Congressman.
That's hard for me.
I know, that's why I'm putting it out there with all respect. Try your best.
I want to talk about the African part of your question.
Hold up, I'll bring you mine, Congressman.
Okay. No, I think it's back on. Thank you. It sounds like you all can hear me, right? Raise your hand if you can't hear me. It's just a joke. Okay. You know, you got a fair question. Thank you. Okay. And my answer to this is, unfortunately, has several parts. My first answer is that I tell the truth. You know, I'm one of the few people in public life who you will ever hear say these words. The average African-American household in this country makes $35,000 a year. The average white household in this country makes almost $55,000 a year. Here's something else you will be hearing from other elected officials in this country. The college rate, the college graduation rate for whites in this country is just around 25%. The college graduation for African Americans is in the mid-teens. Again, an enormous staggering disparity. And I could go on and on. I think that there are many people who just want to ignore the whole issue of racism and discrimination. and bigotry in this country. I am not one of those. I think that by telling the truth, you can at least begin to address the problems that you have. Secondly, I think I bear witness. I'll give you a couple of examples. If you go back and look at the Trayvon Martin memorials in Sanford, you'll find few, if any, white faces in that crowd except for me. We had a very moving memorial after he died, where the parents were sitting directly in front of me, and Jesse Jackson was, if I recall correctly, on my left, Al Sharpton was on my right. Might have that backwards. You've had a tragic case here of a young African-American boy who was killed because the police picked him up, drove him a couple miles, dropped him there, he'd never seen before. He was hit by a car and he was killed. I've called for an FBI investigation of that incident. So I bear witness. And I also, to the extent I can, actually try to do constructive things. I'll give you a couple examples. I introduced an amendment to prevent the government from this crazy idea that they had. They were going to take drones that were no longer used by the CIA and deploy them to American cities. I think it's safe to say which neighborhoods they would have ended up with. And I passed an amendment to prevent that. I'll give you another example. I introduced an amendment in order to prohibit the militarization of our police. The fact that right now, up until this point recently, it was legal for the military to give machine guns, tanks, missiles, bombers to our local police forces. I thought that was horrifying. And I introduced an amendment. It was one of those few cases where I lost. I passed 54 amendments in the past 3 years. I didn't get that one. And then 2 months later, Ferguson happened. And people came to me and said, how did you know that was going to happen? That we'd see a black neighborhood with an occupying military police force full of whites. How did you know that was going to happen? And I thought to myself, how could you not know? How could you not know? So I can't say to you that I've been enormously successful, but one of my proudest moments was when President Obama took the Grayson Amendment and instituted by executive order. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Mark Proctor, and I wanted to get this back on the smear campaign. I got tired of listening to issues. So, knowing I'd get yelled at, I want to quote my source, and that was last week's New York Times, and it wrote an article, a report on your civilian fund, which was formerly the Grayson Fund. The following day, to give the source, Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid called for you to drop out of the U.S. Senate race because you were had no moral compass. My question to you is, what is your response to the New York Times and to Harry Reid?
Well, to Harry Reid, I want to point out that Harry Reid is under criminal investigation right now, so I hardly think that Harry Reid should be preaching to me about a moral compass. I mean, for goodness sake, Harry Reid's been a human cash register now for his entire career in Congress. He's everybody's lobbyist's best friend. And I can't even understand what makes him think he has any moral authority whatsoever with regard to that. But anyway, with regard to the underlying story, Harry's just got it wrong. I mean, Harry gets a lot of things wrong these days, but the fact is I never made a penny, not a penny, from trading on my congressional experience. Never. Not even once. And you can, there's trackers in the room, you can see there's a bunch of cameras around, okay? Everything I say is being recorded, all right? But it's true. I mean, for goodness sake, one of the worst things that you could do is what Harry Reid did to me. He bore false witness. All right? Now, for those of you who are familiar with the Ten Commandments, one of them says, thou shalt not bear false witness. But as I explained to you all before, I'm a tough guy, I can live with it, I want to do good things for good people, and I'm going to keep going no matter what. And by the way, every single poll since last August shows me ahead. The only way that they think they can defeat me is to pressure me into dropping out. And you know what I say to them? The one-finger salute.
Thank you, Congressman. All right, we got time for 2 more questions. We got Mr. Wilson and Mr. McRae, and then wrap it up to the Garfield Committee. You can start thinking about it. We got 2 more questions. Here we go, Greg.
I'm Gregory Wilson. Thank you so much for being here. We certainly appreciate, my goodness, your energy, your substance, your humility, Mr. Grayson.
I'm known for that. So much to be humble about.
And we appreciate your deference and respect for each other. So I'm going to come back to issues and ask, is there a defining issue that separates you, and you might appreciate this, the elephant who's not in the room?
Actually, we've got him. Can you bring him in? Oh, no. All right, well, he'll be waiting for you all outside, okay? As soon as we're done, Patrick Murphy will be right outside. Okay? Believe me.
Okay, thank you for your kind words. I will say that the differences between Representative Grayson and myself are principally what we focus on, our stylistic differences, our world experience. I think very highly of Alan Grayson, and I'm not here to be part of the chorus that's excoriating him. I will say a thing or two about Patrick Murphy since he's not here. He's not here to defend himself, and I take that as a personal privilege. I voted for Patrick Murphy. I supported Patrick Murphy. I went door to door for Patrick Murphy. I raised money for Patrick Murphy. He is my congressman, okay? I think he owes me an apology. Because when I voted for him, I thought that he shared my democratic values. When I voted for him, I thought he understood where Democrats come from. And there's a couple things that I learned in this last 18 months that have dissuaded me of that opinion. The first is that Patrick Murphy sided with Republicans to keep out Syrian refugees from this country. Now, I know he had reasons for doing so. And I don't doubt that there are people who are very afraid of Syrian refugees. The problem is, that's not who we are. As Democrats, we don't judge people because of their religion. We don't assume that they're threats to us because they're different than us. That is not a democratic sensibility. I expected Patrick Murphy to stand up on the floor and say, no, that's not who we are. If France can accept Syrian refugees, if the Netherlands and Sweden and Greece, countries who have a whole lot less money, a whole lot less resources, and are a whole lot closer to the problem, could be courageous in the face of racism and bigotry, then so can the United States. We're supposed to be leaders. And he failed to lead on that issue. So I was very disappointed. Another way that I was very disappointed was in Patrick's vote on the Benghazi hearings. I'm going to tell you something. I go up and down the state talking to Democrats. I've been talking to Democrats all across the country. There's not a single Democrat anywhere that did not know that Trey Gowdy was on a witch hunt. Every single Democrat I've ever talked to knew that that was a political stunt trying to harm Hillary Clinton. My question is, why didn't Patrick Murphy know that? Every time he speaks, Patrick says the following: I vote my conscience. I think he does. His problem is that it's a Republican conscience. Now, that doesn't make him a bad person, but it makes him the wrong person to lead Democrats in this state. He may have been a great candidate for a +3 Republican district. But we're talking about somebody that's going to Washington to represent not just Democrats, but all Floridians from a Democratic perspective. Because they have candidates who are going to run to represent Floridians from a Republican perspective. We don't need to add a candidate to that mix. This is the time for Democrats to choose their nominee. And I think it's very telling that Patrick did not show up here to take your questions and to be challenged on what he stands for. I, as a Democrat, and I, as a Floridian, am disappointed in what he has done to date. And I have made my case today as to why I think I am a better choice.
Thank you, Ms. Keith. All right, Mr. McCray, bring us home.
I'm wearing my Harry Reid sunglasses, so. My name is Albert McCray. I'm the editor of TampaNewsAndTalk.com. I'm going to change it subtly a bit. Arbitration. Whether you're buying a car, cell phone, getting an oil change, those contracts have arbitration clauses which prevent you from due process or going to court. In most cases, if not all cases, the arbitrators are picked by the industry to arbitrate the case. Should it be a national law banning arbitration or the option for arbitration on these contracts?
Thank you, Adam.
Well, the problem that you're describing is in fact pervasive, and the legal term that's used to describe when there should not be such an agreement is called a contract of adhesion. When you have a contract of adhesion, it's take it or leave it. You can't go into an auto shop and negotiate a contract. That's not going to happen. You can't go to a website and negotiate. Negotiate terms of service.
public say?
Have trouble with me. And you can't negotiate, sir.
It's the bottom. You gotta push it up, don't pull it down. There you go, try that.
How about now? All right? Okay, good, thanks. I'll assault your ear in some other way. The fact is that it's not fair, and it's exactly the way that you described. And I do support, we had a law in California that basically said whenever there's a contract of adhesion, by court rule, you could not enforce an arbitration clause. That's my position. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court overruled that position and said that the American Arbitration Act takes precedence over state law. I would reverse that. I don't think that's fair. It is a stacked deck against the consumer, the purchaser, whatever we may be talking about. And I have a record on this. The Republicans are constantly trying to expand arbitration unfairly. I voted against each and every bill. You could look it up. Each and every bill where they have attempted to do that.
I think it's an interesting point that you raised about arbitration, and I agree with Alan, they are technically contracts of adhesion because you really aren't in a position to negotiate. I think the bigger problem is that the arbitrators are selected by, like you said, the industry, or they're selected by the person who actually wrote the contract. I spent a career actually working in arbitrations in the private sector, and there are certain patterns that develop amongst our arbitrators. I think the bigger problem, though, is that we use that same arbitration process when we are dealing with all kinds of disciplinary problems. And while that can work really well in a private context, what we have found is that there are certain kinds of patterns that emerge in public unions that can be very troubling, especially when we're talking about law enforcement. So I think we should be looking at that very carefully. But the reality is, our courts cannot take the load that they've got. And so if we double or triple the load on the courts so that everybody can go to court for all of their commercial disputes, we're going to bog that system down even more. So if we're going to change those laws, then we had better be doing better at funding our court system so that people have real access to justice. Otherwise, you're just making it that much harder for you to even go get any kind of justice, let alone arbitration. So just something to think about.
All right, well that will wrap it up, and I can tell you,